How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today, Stephen?
I'm doing very well. It's been a productive morning. After yeah, I woke up, I did some cleaning around the house and made
Mm.
some breakfast, and when we did our postpone a little bit, then I went and did some grocery shopping. Yeah, so it's
Wow,
been yeah, it's
quite
been a
nice.
yeah. So how have you been?
Pretty good, pretty good. Today's kind of. I think you were saying you had rain, and we're kind of
Hmm.
having the same sort of thing. It looks a little gray outside, and it's been gray all day, so it's teasing us. There was some rain like last night. I could hear the rain while I was
Mm,
sleeping, um,
yeah.
but yeah, we're okay now.
Yeah, it's been raining here too. It's supposed to thunder later, and hoping it's not while we're recording.
Hopefully not. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've been kind of fighting a little bit of a headache because of the rain, but I'm
Oh,
feeling okay now. I
good.
popped a soda. That's usually my go-to caffeine shot. I do that when I'm
Nice.
writing too. It's like my thing.
Oh,
Anyway,
really?
yeah. I like because sometimes I just like my head is just working too much, and then just
Mm.
need a moment. I feel like there's like this film that goes over my eyes. Crap, am I
Oh,
still
yeah.
recording? Can you still hear me? Okay, good.
Yeah,
I
I can still
bumped
hear
this. I want to make sure it didn't knock it off.
you.
Jeez.
Oh
Now
my
that I know how
gosh.
sensitive my microphone is, I'm like scared. I'm scared to breathe. Anyway,
Anyway, so we're here today to talk about 8-bit music in video games. Um,
yes.
Yeah, so we're not going to really get into too much detail about intricacies. We're just here to geek out about the music today.
Yay.
Something that we don't normally do on this podcast. I mean,
That's
a
awesome.
lot of the times on this podcast we do a lot of like, here's some information that you may need, but today we're just going to kick back and relax and talk about some video game music. So
Ah, good.
anyway, but you are a composer who frequently uses 8-bit music. You have an entire album out that uses 8-bit music. That was album 9999,
Yes.
and you do regularly put out 8-bit stuff on your YouTube of kind of like uh, arrangements of some other tunes. And I wanted to hear from you what it's like to compose 8-bit music as opposed to some of the other music that you have done.
Well, I personally love 8-bit just because first off, I've been a gamer ever since I was a child. I was raised on video games, and that's actually where my love of music came from.
Mm,
Because playing games as a child, especially I think the type of games I played, because I loved games that had stories. I liked even games that the story is a little loose, like Legend of Zelda. The first few were kind of like save the kingdom kind of thing, and so it's not
yeah.
really but like later Zeldas obviously get more of a lore, more of history and everything. And one of my biggest loves was Final Fantasy,
Mm,
and so I was always emotionally connected to the music, especially moving into the 16-bit era with Super Nintendo. Um, and so my little 6 to 7 to 8 year old self was just desperate to play what I was hearing.
hmm.
And so I got this keyboard given to me by a neighbor, and I just jumped on. I started figuring music out by ear, training my ear ever since I was a kid, and just developing from there. So my first concept of music was in 8-bit. So yeah, I've always had a love for 8-bit music. I think specifically I really like um, I could kind of ramble about this for a while, I guess. I do tend to do that sometimes.
No
Um,
worries.
but like, I think there's kind of like a beauty in its minimalistness
Mm,
that whenever when I was growing up on not just Nintendo but also computer games, where the soundtracks were literally beeps of music at you.
hmm.
And sometimes there's like one track, one tone of beeping for music. Um, it just always, I just loved the minimalness of it. Really kind of lets you as the person hearing the music fill in and interpret um, and put yourself into it. It's almost like the same way that I feel graphics and video games in general have progressed through the generations, where we started off with 4 to 16 color games on old school computers.
Hmm.
And then we went through this period of suddenly it was rapid development into like 256 colors. And then suddenly it was millions of colors overnight. And um, I feel like now we have a lot of very beautiful games in really high def graphics and smooth frame rate. And we've progressed all the way to like fully orchestrated soundtracks for video
Hmm.
games, as opposed to what was so simple back then.
Yeah.
And have you ever heard of the Uncanny Valley
Yeah.
as far as aesthetics go? It's sort of like, I almost feel like there was kind of a moment right in the middle where we were losing touch of the imagination aspect of video games and music, and it was
Hmm.
suddenly like this kind of awkward teenage years of video games where it's like it was trying a little bit too much to be realistic. It was losing a little bit of the imagination.
Hmm.
And um and I think now we're a little bit past that. We don't really have games that you see like a character who looks kind of human and it sort of freaks you out because it doesn't look good. It's like blocky. And
Yeah.
and then like the music too, like, one of the best, this is debatable. I'm about to say something a little controversial, but the one of the best soundtracks in my opinion is Final Fantasy VII, and it's also one of the most popular soundtracks. But
Hmm.
ironically, that was kind of right in that time where the characters looked like blocks,
Hmm.
and the music, even the soundtrack, was a little bit like, there's a lot of disparity, I think, in the quality between Final Fantasy VI's 16-bit soundtrack going to Final Fantasy VII, and it's like there's a lot of people who even say, that the instruments sound worse in Final Fantasy VII. They sound almost like tinny and fake,
Hmm.
despite the soundtrack being incredible and having so many songs that, whatever.
Yeah.
And so I kind of feel like when you go back to 8-bit and you really kind of strip away this attempt to be realistic, and you kind of get this real sense of just musicality and cleverness and whatnot, there's something that really speaks about that to me. I think
Yeah.
that's what I really like. And I think personally that a lot of people are kind of feeling that uh, nostalgia for how gaming used to be. I mean, retro is so in right now. It's like it's the thing.
Yeah.
There's so many games that I love the fact that it is. Some of my favorite games kind of came out of this revolution of retro gaming. But anyway,
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is definitely making a comeback, and it's surprising how much. I mean, even as somebody who doesn't play video games a whole lot,
mm,
there's there's so much nostalgia built into that sound nowadays. I
yeah,
think that's why it's coming back, is because there is so much nostalgia built into it, and uh, in our generation. I mean, every time I think about 8-bit music, my mind goes back to me just literally playing hours on end on my Game Boy Color. It was purple, and you could see through it. I can't remember the word at the top of my head. Um, and
transparent.
the transparent purple, and
Hmm.
just playing the Pokemon Crystal,
Ooh.
and just every chance that I had, I would turn up the music. I mean, because every time I would turn on the music and we were in the car and I was playing the game, and my parents would be like, turn that music down, it's giving me a headache. Because
That's so nice.
it's very tingy sound,
Yeah.
and I get it. It's it is very kind of bright,
Yeah.
and
It's
in your
true.
face, um, but still, like, when I listen to that kind of music nowadays, I just can't help but think back to my childhood of playing those kinds of games, and I think that's really what it's all coming back to.
Yeah. I think maybe there is a very strong sense of nostalgia about it. Like, because I kind of wonder sometimes people who are really into 8-bit music who didn't grow up with it, how
Yeah,
did they form a connection to these sounds? Because it's not really nostalgia for them. It's something new. It's
right.
something interesting. It's like, old school to them. like,
Yeah,
oh, that's before my time. I was born in 2000, whatever.
yeah,
Um, They're not an 80s baby. Uh, I grew up on this Nintendo. That was
Yeah.
literally the entire world. I couldn't even fathom past it.
Yeah. Yeah, my sister, she's the youngest of all of us, and there's four of us, and she was born in 2001.
Mhm.
Um so she every time we talk about video games and whenever they're brought up, we don't really talk about video games a whole lot in my family. Um she doesn't really know about those kinds of games, and has never been able to experience them because the first system that we had was a PS2. Yeah.
Mm.
Or the first system that she remembers that we have was a
Yeah.
um, the first system that we actually had was a Nintendo 64. And even then, those kinds of that was already kind of beyond there. I remember the only few games that I was actually playing regularly on the Nintendo 64 was Pokemon Snap.
Yeah.
um, and what was the name of the game? I can't remember, but I remember all the games that we had didn't really have that much. It was the music was already pretty much advanced for its point, and
Hmm.
but so yeah, I think it's such an interesting thing to think about. I mean, like I said, every time I listen to 8-bit music, I'm always brought back to my childhood, even though I didn't play video games like that when I
Yeah.
was a kid.
And another thing I think that's interesting to point out is how so many of these series that kind of birthed 8-bit in a lot of our ears and our hearts are still
Hmm.
around. I mean,
Yeah.
they're still making Mario games. They're
Hmm.
still making Castlevania games. They're still making Zelda games.
Yeah.
They're hopefully soon still making Metroid games. So they're still making Final Fantasy games. And
Yep.
what's incredible about it too, I think, is you know, I think for someone who maybe isn't a fan of 8-bit, it might be easy to excuse it or to kind of, you know, think of it as like that genre that they set it aside. It's like arcane beep bop boop kind of music.
Yep.
And I think what's fascinating me in particular, I'm going to use my mom as an example actually, because
Hmm.
she hears a lot of the music that I'm listening to. And sometimes the 8-bit music's a little okay, unless I've remixed like a song that like we know. um for instance, a lot of my 8-bits I started off with, I would remix popular music like Lady
Yeah.
Gaga. I did Michael Jackson Thriller was one of my first ones I did. I did a lot of Tori Amos. I did Bjork, a whole lot of 90s, an Alanis Morissette album, for example,
Hmm.
Radiohead. But anyway, she would click to that because she recognized the music. But what's so fascinating to me is that a lot of this music, for instance, I'm just going to use Final Fantasy as an example. Um, Brilliant composer Nobuo Uematsu, he starts off the series in Nintendo format,
Hmm.
and you hear these themes that start in the first few Final Fantasies. Fast forward to Final Fantasy VII, to Final Fantasy X, even to Final Fantasy 15, the newest one. It's like you hear those same themes that were conceived in 8-bit, and full orchestras are playing this gorgeous music. And it's
Hmm.
like, when you think, really, is there a difference? Because the 8-bit, they were restricted into four channels, two pulse tracks, a triangle wave, and noise, basically. And the way that, when you're composing the music, maybe he heard the orchestra when he was composing these quote unquote video game songs in the 80s and
Hmm.
90s. So it's really fascinating to think the music was there and it was always there, the real quote unquote real music. It was interpreted in a different way. And
Hmm.
I find it really fascinating to kind of, especially in the like hearing Castlevania themes in orchestra as opposed to the
Yeah.
8-bit. It's just it's a complete, especially like Zelda, Mario. It's just, I love seeing what capabilities time kind of gives us to, now we have, like I've said, game soundtracks composed in full orchestra. It's
Hmm.
amazing. Like one of my favorite soundtracks, a friend of mine just got into Ori and the Blind Forest, and I was like, "Good job!" And I don't know if you play that game or not. It has a gorgeous soundtrack. It's so
Mhm.
moving.
Yeah, I have not played that game. I'm so limited to the games that I've played.
Yeah.
I just yeah, I recently I've been playing Fable 2.
Mm, yeah.
Um, I was playing Oblivion for a while,
Oblivion.
only because my last gameplay interview was about the games of Skyrim, Oblivion,
Oh,
and
okay.
Morrowind. So it was all of the Elder Scrolls games,
Yeah.
and I was playing it for a while, and I was like, oh, I'm getting kind of bored of Oblivion. I needed a little bit more structure.
Yeah.
Uh, for my mind frame at the moment, so I switched over to Fable. I was like, oh, it's kind of in the same kind of genre, but it's a little bit more straightforward, and you have missions that you have to follow in kind of certain orders, and
Right.
um, so I've been playing that. But before that, I was kind of watching my fiance play Final Fantasy X. And we were
Mm-hmm.
we he did his interview with me on that one, and we just listening, and especially because Final Fantasy X now has the updated kind of remastered soundtrack to
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That's
just
true.
listening to he in his we're gonna circle back to that idea of nostalgia. Is he doesn't like to play Final Fantasy X with the remastered soundtrack. He's
I
like,
get it. I get it.
if
Yeah.
if I'm going to play this game, I'm going to use the original
Yep.
soundtrack. It's
I'm
but for
telling you,
me,
there is something that's lost. I'm telling you, there's something about it that you can't, yeah,
I
sorry.
can understand. No, I can definitely understand that. But
Hmm.
but for me, as somebody who's never played the game, um, and has only listened to the soundtrack, pretty much in terms of like experiencing the game, as somebody who has consumed the game in some form, I've only ever listened to the soundtrack,
Yeah.
and so for me, listening to the remastered version is a whole lot better. Um, just because of the level of quality. However, I completely understand, like, if I were to play a game that has music that I remember fondly, and
Yeah.
then they all of a sudden change it on me, then I'm going to be like, I don't like that anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, so yeah, I totally understand that. And
I
yeah,
think
it's just,
part of that nostalgia, I think, also might be a little bit like trying to imagine your favorite movie with a different soundtrack. It's
yeah,
like you have emotional associations, and so when someone, usually, here's the other thing I think might be important to note, is that sometimes, now I can't speak about Final Fantasy X because I'm not quite sure who did the rearrangements,
yeah,
but quite often it's someone else. And
yeah,
that's, I think, a very important thing to note, that it feels like the authenticity that created that emotional connection between you and the
yeah,
game and the story, someone else has come in and tampered with it. And they've
yeah,
decided, oh, I'm going to add this whole bridge that you don't recognize in the middle of this song that you were waiting for, and suddenly it's something else. Like, I think a
yeah,
lot of people were experiencing that with the Final Fantasy VII remake
hmm,
that they just recently put out. I mean, it's wildly popular, and the music is actually really good. It's incredible, and it's composed by someone else, but they're using Nobuya Uematsu's original soundtrack, so it's kind
right,
of like half arranged, half original, and there's just something about it that, like, sometimes it works and it's kind of cool, and sometimes you just feel like you're in someone else's world, and it's a little bit like,
yeah,
I'm playing Final Fantasy and I miss Final Fantasy, like something's happening.
yeah,
So I get it, and I think,
yeah.
yeah.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna
Oh,
say, I kind of, I'm trying to, I'm feeling like there's a parallel there with that issue and 8-bit
yeah,
and the world of what's nostalgic and what we're connecting to, as opposed to what we're hearing now in video
yeah.
games.
So, I mean, you've already mentioned Legends of Zelda, but what are some of your favorite video games that use 8-bit music?
Um, okay, so there's Legend of Zelda, there's Final
Hmm.
Fantasy. Let me think of some others that aren't like the series. Oh, Mega Man, that's a big one.
Hmm.
Mega Man's another one that they're still making the games, and it came from an 8-bit era as well. I
Hmm.
think I think probably one of the most popular Mega Man soundtracks would be Mega Man 2. I'm not quite sure why. I know that the composer changed throughout the series. It wasn't always the same composer, but Mega Man 2 is just something special about that one. Um, I think that was kind of like the Final Fantasy VII of the Mega Man series. Like, it's just when that one came out, just like everyone suddenly knew what Mega Man was.
Yeah,
Um, What else? Maniac Mansion was a huge game when I was a kid. That was wildly like I was obsessed with that game. And while I might have actually turned off the music most of the time when I played it, because I don't know if you know Maniac Mansion, but you play these different characters, and they're basically they go to this mansion that has like this whole this alien thing happening, and you're trying to solve like it's sort of a point and click adventure thing, and like
Okay.
each character has a CD player or a tape deck. I don't remember what it is, and it's playing their theme song on loop while you're
Okay.
playing the game, and whenever you switch characters, it switches the music. But I always found the game creepier when I turned off the music and I just kind of listened to the sound effects in the game.
Okay.
Like so like I find it kind of funny that I'm mentioning the Maniac Mansion soundtrack, and I as a kid I didn't listen to music as much, but as an adult I do, and I'm recognize like how surprisingly complex it was. Usually, this is something else I'd like to mention about 8-bit. Usually, like we hear the loop in a video game song, you know,
Yeah.
like you hear when it okay, it's gone back to the beginning, it's looping now.
Yeah.
Um, there's something Maniac Mansion, the music in particular. I know there's some other soundtracks that do this too. The loops are so long, like you literally don't notice that the song hasn't looped, and it's been like 2.5 minutes of music already, and
Wow.
that's really long because usually Nintendo songs are like 40 seconds and then it loops, or 20
Yeah.
seconds and then it loops, or even worse, there's some that are like 5 seconds and it loops. And
Oh
you're
my
just like,
God.
oh my god, I've been listening to this for like 30 minutes and I can't solve this puzzle.
The same 5 seconds of music over and over again.
I'm like, really? Does the composer have no other ideas other than
Yeah.
5 notes that I've been listening to for an hour now while I'm trying to find the blue key to get out of the room?
Yeah. Although part of me wonders how much of that is also the other game makers as well, saying like we don't really need that much music here. Just give
That's
us.
a very good point.
Yeah.
And also like restriction, I think this is probably more of a Super Nintendo thing, but like restrictions on the chip that they needed to like,
Yeah.
because I know that that was actually part of the issue with Final Fantasy 7. I think was he wanted more intricate instruments, and then they had to cut it back for whatever reason. I mean, Final Fantasy is known for the music. Why would you cut back on the music? But
Right.
anyway, I might be mixing up what I've read, but I because I'm like literally trying to pull from an article I probably read like 20 years ago. But I remember that they had to compromise on the sound. But
Yeah.
anyway, you don't compromise an 8-bit. You have what you have. But I have no
Yeah.
idea if the length of a loop takes up game room or not. But you know, it's funny though, because like there are games like, let me think, Solomon's Key, that was a big one that I played
Mhm.
as a kid. And that game, it's a simple puzzle game, but every single level is the same song playing. Bubble Bobble is another one. With the little dragons and the bubbles and stuff. And like
Mhm.
that one, the same song is playing on loop the entire time you're playing the game. And yet somehow like your brain, I don't know, you're just tricked, you're hypnotized a bit by the
Mhm.
simplicity of the 8-bit that you don't quite get annoyed by it. I never once as a kid got annoyed with a song. I got annoyed as an adult because I noticed things, but as a
Yeah.
kid I never got annoyed with the repetitiveness of 8-bit music.
Hmm.
Wizards
Yeah.
and Warriors was another one I think that had like a song that just every screen was the same frickin' do 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 do. I was like, okay, but I was like, I can't believe I didn't notice this as a kid. But anyway,
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. It's funny to think about that. I'm just remembering now
mm-hmm.
what the other video game that I used to play was on Nintendo 64. I think it was called
Quest.
Quest. Um,
Quest. That sounds very familiar.
I don't. I just remember it was definitely like one of those like where you're just walking around and then all of a sudden you're now in a battle. I don't know what type like how what's that really called where all
RPG.
of a I guess, yeah. I mean, like in Final Fantasy X, I'm just kind of recalling, like
Mm-hmm.
you accidentally step on where they're going to trigger a battle between you and all these monsters,
Yeah,
um, and then you're transported into a separate,
yeah, battle screen.
yeah, battle screen, right? Um,
Yeah, it's usually the
and
RPG style.
yeah, and I just remember there being crazy monsters and they were so ugly. um
Yeah,
I
See,
don't.
it's that I'm telling you, I'm just gonna keep coming back to it. That's the uncanny valley of just like you get to these, especially Nintendo 64. I think was the big thing because
Mm-hmm.
I think that's when a lot of gaming split. Because for me personally, I never had an N64. That was the one that I skipped because
Mm,
Final Fantasy went to the PlayStation, and I followed
okay.
Final Fantasy to the PlayStation, so I missed the era of an N64.
Yeah.
I came back to the GameCube because of Metroid, but I
Yeah, we
yeah
had the Nintendo 64 or we had the computer.
yeah me too.
Just PC games and
Oh yeah.
just I remember like Freddy the Fish, and I'm not remembering any of the music of these games, by the way, and we're kind of drifting off from that. But
Yeah.
I don't remember like I remember Freddy the Fish. I remember a specific game where the only thing I'll ever remember from that game is they taught us how to count the months, like how many days are in a month based off of like the
Oh.
knuckles of your fingers and like 30 and I don't remember anything else about that game. Um but yeah, I it's incredible. And to think that like how much of like our generation's childhood is based around these kinds of games
Yeah.
uh and that yeah, it's great stuff.
And you know another thing with like you're saying about like our emotional connection in our
Hmm.
childhood, something else has occurred to me specifically with Final Fantasy X, and then thinking back on other games,
Hmm.
is that Final Fantasy X was the first Final Fantasy to feature voice acting, and
Right. I
you
remember
know,
that. Mm.
and so when you go back, especially like Nintendo and Super Nintendo and that era, the only thing you had to convey the emotion of the story was the music. I mean,
Hmm.
you have sound effects, sure, but you have music. You don't have someone's voice. You're
Yeah.
reading the dialogue on the screen, and there's something that connects stronger with what's going on. I think, um, because I mean, I love Final Fantasy X's music, even though it's not just Nobuo Uematsu. That's he brought in. There's two other composers also, so it's like a mix.
Right.
But you know, there are moments in the game that I emotionally connected to with the music. But honestly, that's kind of the first Final Fantasy where I connected less. And I think because you have voices now that are kind of interpreting into the story, and um, you're not 100% relying on the music to
Right.
convey it. You know, because there's some games that have no voice acting, and I feel like when you're depending on the music to be the voice of the game,
Right,
you get
exactly. Like
you're connected to
yeah,
it.
when you are about to enter a battle, all of a sudden the music just switches.
Dun dun
Uh
dun 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 dun.
yeah.
Dun. Final Fantasy. Da, da,
Yeah.
da, 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 da.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or like because I specifically remember the Pokemon. Dun 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 dun.
Keep
I,
going. Go ahead. Sing the whole thing. I'm kidding.
I actually don't I remember that part and that's it. Um
Oh my
yeah.
gosh.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
yeah, just thinking about that and how that all of that was like you said, you have the music and that's all you have of being able to know what's going on in the world because there's no voices. It's just you watching, reading the text on screen and listening to the music and playing the game. And I think that's why kind of a lot of the times you're able to turn off the sound. It's because you don't have anything there to rely on, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, and so because you can sit there and you can read the text and I just because I remember being something, but I feel like nowadays if you were to turn down the volume, I mean, I know that I can't play a game anymore without having the volume turned all the way up.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
because there's just so much involved in video games now where um and I'm actually just thinking about this right now. Um, Video games that rely on music, and this is a piece of music that I think both of us have had a connection to by now is Journey.
Mm.
Um, and the reliance on music throughout the game because there's no text whatsoever,
Yeah. Yeah.
not even text boxes.
Yeah.
Um, it's just a silent character, um, and the use of sound, even the like just pitches to communicate with characters that you may join you online.
Yeah.
Um, I've never played it online. I eventually want to try, but
Yeah.
I think that game is just good by itself too.
Yeah.
Um,
It was
but
quite an
yeah,
experience playing that one.
yeah,
If like it's
yeah.
weird because I literally usually I savor games and I'll even if it's a short game like Portal
Hmm.
1 for example, I savored it. I kind of played it over the whole course of a week, even though I probably could have finished it one day. But for some reason, I played Journey in just one night, just one
Yeah,
single night. I played the entire game, and that one tiny night feels like I played the game for months because it has sat in my heart somewhere ever
yeah,
since. And it's that connection with the fact that it doesn't tell you anything. There's no words. It's
yeah.
literally just figure it out, jump in the game and figure it out. And
Hmm.
it's beautiful, and it's and then the music, like you said, it's gorgeous. I think that's actually I might be mixing this up with another game, but I think that game is actually one of the only games that got
It was the
like a
first game to get a Grammy
there
nomination.
you go, Grammy nomination. And I was shocked to hear that. I was like, heck
Yeah,
yeah, video game represent, right?
yeah.
Like,
First
yes,
video game score.
awesome.
Yeah, that's an incredible thing. And I've been,
It is.
um, if Austin Wintory is listening to this, I hope to hear from you soon about becoming one of my guests. So, but yeah,
I hope he hears from you soon too. I second that.
yeah. I love his music. There's his new game Pathless. I am trying. I really want to try and get that game because I hear so much good things about that music, and I've been watching so many videos about like just that extension of his music that he kind of formulated through Journey, and I'm so excited to try and play that game.
Ooh,
However, I'm kind of
add to the
just
list.
thinking, oh yes, I'm kind of thinking in my head now, how would Journey sound in 8-bit?
That's actually one of the, yeah. I mean, that's kind of the question I always ask myself. Like, um, to jump back into like you pointed out that I do a lot of 8-bit on my YouTube.
Yeah,
That's one thing is one of the things that started me doing that was just because I thought it was kind of fun to
yeah,
interpret, the songs in 8-bit. I kind of call them 8-bit covers.
yeah.
I'm covering the song in 8-bit. Um, but the thing is that I was kind of discouraged because I was hearing like whenever I would look up 8-bit songs or things like let's say that I was looking up the Journey soundtrack
Hmm.
in 8-bit, um, I was always so discouraged because it seemed like so many of them were like like they had the music shoved through a machine and then it
Hmm.
just produces an 8-bit
Yes,
chiptune-ish sound.
yeah.
And so what I did differently was which I'm sure I'm not the only one, but like what I did differently was I literally recomposed the song using 8-bit instruments from scratch.
Hmm.
So even to the and because a lot of the songs I did have vocals, I would put very nuanced notes so that it felt like the instruments were singing at you. And I thought it was super innovative and I thought it was super cool. And I was like, and I even had like people, I had several comments actually on a couple of my videos saying that I faked it somehow, that I somehow took their vocals and did exactly what I'm trying not to do,
Mm.
shoving it through a machine. And I'm like, no, that's how nuanced I get with the music. I'm very specific. I'm very control freak when it comes to certain instruments and stuff. But here's the funny thing is that I thought I was so innovative about it, but there's a lot of 8-bit soundtracks that I hadn't exposed myself to yet. And I got really obsessed with just, there was a moment when I probably still have them honestly, like 300 to 400 different 8-bit soundtracks of different video games on my computer. And I would just constantly listen to a different one every day when I'm writing or when I'm doing my work. And there is some crazy, we were just talking about minimalism of 8-bit, but there is
Mhm.
some crazy complex 8-bit out there. And it's not fake bit like like
Yeah.
some people teasingly say when you're kind of breaking the rules and you're not staying true to what 8-bit is. Um, and those real 8-bit songs, I mean, it's incredible how much you can pack into three tiny channels of
Mhm.
sound. Like I know a lot of the songs they'll use tricks like arpeggiating, or arpeggios and arpeggiating different chords, and so you get like, it seems like there's 8 notes playing at once and it's just 3 or
Yeah.
2. um and I just, hearing like the different techniques that some of these composers would use to really like thrust a lot of that sound. And there's square waves that sound like drums somehow. There's a
Mm.
triangle, especially a triangle wave, like when it kind of doom doom doom, like it goes just down, it sounds like a drum, like when it's in those bass notes.
Mm.
And then the different ways that you can kind of have the noise track interfere with, or have 2 different pulse waves on top of each other, and it makes a totally different sound. It's just incredible what you can do.
Yeah.
And so the complexity set me on a whole other obsession wave of just imagining the craziest things I could try to imagine in 8-bit. And kind of like when you dove into thinking of, gosh, what would Journey's soundtrack sound like in 8-bit?
Hmm.
Like, I love that concept of, you can really imagine. I feel like my mind's just kind of blown as far as, take it down, just, see what you can do with
Hmm.
imagining the unimaginable in 8-bit.
Mm.
Take that as a tagline. I'm kidding. But
Yeah.
anyway.
the the tagline of this episode.
There you go. Imagine the unimaginable in bits of 8.
Thank you for dropping by to watch this video. If you want to continue this episode, head over to your favorite podcast platform right now and subscribe to the show. You can also finish watching this episode on the Composer Chronicles' Patreon page when you sign up at the $5 Revellion tier or the $10 Wagnerian tier. All Patreon members also get early access to ad-free versions of the podcast, so head on over there for some great bonus content while supporting the Composer Chronicles. You can find the links to the podcast and the Patreon in the description below. Be sure to subscribe to the Alexandria Media YouTube channel for more videos like this one, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. You can find all information about this episode below in the description, and give this video a thumbs up if you've enjoyed watching. I look forward to seeing you over at the podcast or on the Patreon to finish up this episode.